Hello one. So in this session, we are going to proceed with where we left off for the multi-step form. All we are going to be adding in this session is the ability to reset our form. So I will be adding two ways that a user can reset their form. The first way is the global reset, whereby a user can reset all the forms that they have filled in. And these are all the multi-step forms. And the other option is the ability to reset an individual step. Let me demonstrate this really quickly. So for example, here in the personal details, I can just fill in random data. I go to the next step, random email or even just say next and then keep learning and then I consent. So as we said, we can be able to reset specific steps. So we can start with the specific step reset. And for example, here I can reset this specific form. I just click reset. So you see the form is reset and also the validity itself. So I cannot go to the next steps. So updating this with the second value, let's say then 2. Then I can go to next. So as you see, when we go to the next step, the values for the next step, they are persisted because the reset that we did only affected the personal details. So here, for example, we can reset our experience. And if we go back, we see that contact information is persisted. Then we can go next. So here we can say, let's now go to the next step and let's go actually all the way to the end. So right here, we can now say, let's reset all forms. You can actually reset the forms at any steps, but let's do it in the end. So reset all forms. You see what happens is that all the forms are reset. And that means that you need to now start all over from the first step because you cannot proceed to the next step if the current step is invalid. So without further ado, let's get started. So let us start with reset all forms. We go to our steps label indicator because that's where we have added this action button. It's not a button, it's actually a div, but all that it does is that it receives a click event. Then this click event is tied to this public method of the steps label indicator component. Now, the most important thing is that all we need to do is to simply call reset all forms, which I added in our multi-step form service. So this is the most important part. And let me explain it really quick why it's important and why we need this for resetting all the forms. So this is how our data will look like when we log it. If you have watched the previous tutorial, we reach to that point. When we reach to the end and the user can submit the form, we simply log out what the user has filled in. And these are the steps. So notice that our steps, this multi-step form, is a key object value. Yeah, it's a dictionary. So that's why when we are going to reset all these forms, all we need to do is to simply say this dot multi-step form, the key, and the key can be additional information, contact information, and so forth. If you have other keys down the line, they'll appear here. But all we need to do now is to simply say this key, I want it to be an empty object. And after that, all we need to do is to say, I want to jump back to the first step. So when this method is called, we are passing it index 0. And this index 0 will mean that we will jump back to the first step, which is the personal details. All right. So when we look at this method right here, all it does is that it simply updates, the private step index, which is actually of type number. All right. Then it will set the current user step, which is of type istep. Then we can actually decide which step we are in and we render that specific component. Okay, all right. And in this case, because the first component, which is index 0, that we jumped to is personal details. So what will happen is that the personal details component, it will be injected and it will be rendered. And by it being rendered, its constructor will be called, its form will be initialized, okay? And then the ng on init life cycle will also be called. And once it is called, the whole flow starts over once again, because remember, each injection of a component, think of it as a reset of that component into the UI. So in this case, what happens is that we will simply call initialize form with saved fields for the form ref with form reference parameter. And I encourage you to watch the tutorial on how to actually get to these steps because it was actually an interesting one. So I believe you learned something from there, and I will not go into the details on why all these sequence of steps are actually followed. Then after that, we register the form fields because remember right here, when we were resetting it, we assigned it an empty object. So we need to actually recreate these specific fields for that specific step. All right. Then lastly, we listen for the form changes, which is right here. Again, all this information, we covered it in the first part of this session. So that's it. We have covered the part for resetting all forms. Now let's take a look at how we can go ahead with the reset of specific forms. So we will be using personal details component for this specific example. So if we open personal details component, let's open it side by side here, and also its HTML right here. So we notice that the reset action is bound to on reset current form, but this method, it does not exist in our personal details component. And that's because instead of having it here, we have it in our base step component. And this makes our lives easier because each and every child of this base step component will have the possibility of being reset as an individual form. Okay. And that is why in this form, we see that we are actually calling this form.reset. Okay. And this makes it easy for us to reset the specific form for that specific instance. What do I mean by that? You see all these steps that we have, let me open them. So additional information, contact, and so forth. All these steps, the moment they actually initialize, yeah, their property of form, then this specific instance of the form group will be specific to them. And that means when that specific instance of the form is reset, like in this case right here, it will only target the instance of that step. It will not affect the others, okay? But the important thing that you also need to do is to also call the reset current form method, okay, of our multi-step form service. And why is that the case? Remember that the multi-step form is a global form, like the whole form, yeah, with our steps, yeah, that we have right here. So we'll be calling reset current form with the current step key, and the current step key can be additional information, contact information, experience, and so forth. And where do we get this current step key? All we need to do when we are initializing a form with saved fields, we need to get hold of the current step from the shared service, okay? Then this specific step that we get, we simply assign the key value to our current step key, and that's why it's easier for us to use it right here. Instead of duplicating the checks, all we need to do is to simply assign it once and then use it later on. Unlike the case whereby we were resetting all the form fields, we are going to be targeting a specific form, a specific entry. So for example, right here for personal details, we will be passing in a key and the key will have a value of personal details. All right. So when it gets to this part, all it does is that it does exactly what we were doing before. But in this case, we were looping through all the fields. However, here, all we need to do is to simply set that specific field to an empty object. So let's look at all the other components and take a look at the changes that we need to do. So starting, for example, right here with additional information, again, no changes on the component because the method that we are going to be targeting is in the base component. So all we need to do is to simply add this piece of code everywhere in our steps, okay? So right there also, in the contact, in the experience, in the personal details, but in the terms and conditions, we don't need it, yeah? So if you had another type of form, you would need it if you needed to reset that specific form as well, okay? All right. And with that, we have reached the end of today's session. So you have seen how you can easily reset all your forms in your multi-step form, as well as target specific forms within your multi-step form. So always remember, you stop growing when you stop learning. And what you have learned, go further and teach others that you may grow together. And with that, until the next one.